What would you do if the life you've carefully built in the spotlight was suddenly shattered by a past you thought you left behind? James Turner, a Silicon Valley mogul, thought his perfect life was sealed until the woman he abandoned years ago showed up at his wedding with 5 children he never knew existed. 5 children, each one bearing his unmistakable features. But it wasn't just a surprise, it was a reckoning. Emma Scott didn't come for revenge. She came to force James to face the truth he had tried to bury. As the shocking truth unfolded, James found himself standing at a crossroads, his world crumbling, his future uncertain. Could he rebuild the relationships he had destroyed, or was it too late for redemption? The moment Emma walked away, leaving him alone with nothing but the echo of his past mistakes, James's journey toward redemption began. But the real question remains, can he prove to the children he abandoned and the woman he wronged that he's worthy of a second chance? Stay tuned, because what happens next is more than just a story of regret. It's a story of transformation. James Turner stood at the front of the grand venue, the sun dipping low over the rolling hills of Sonoma Valley, casting a golden hue across the meticulously arranged rows of chairs. The luxurious estate was alive with the buzz of wedding preparation, the crisp sounds of crystal glasses being placed, the gentle swish of white tablecloths, and the soft glow of string lights in the cool evening air. This was supposed to be the kind of wedding everyone dreamed of, perfect, elegant, and Instagram-worthy. James, the 42-year-old tech mogul who had turned a humble startup idea into a billion-dollar empire, stood tall, his tuxedo sharp, his silver-tinged hair neatly styled, exuding confidence. His fiancée, Sophia Hayes, was every bit the dazzling model the world knew her to be. At 28, she had graced billboards across Times Square, captured in luxury perfume ads, and strutted on runways in Paris. Today, she glided down the aisle as if she were born for this moment, her beauty almost ethereal. But then something happened. A limousine black as night pulled into the circular driveway with a screech of tires that silenced the hum of the wedding. The guests, eager for the glitz of a billionaire's wedding, turned confused. The vehicle stopped and the door opened. First, a woman stepped out. Crimson silk caught the setting sun, and 5 tiny figures followed behind her. Emma Scott, the woman James had left years ago, the one he swore to forget. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering, not looking at anyone, least of all James. Her 5 children walked in sync behind her, their footsteps quiet on the stone terrace. They were dressed in navy blue outfits, their expressions more mature than their years. The murmurs spread like wildfire, with gasps rising from the guests. And then everything froze. One of the children, a boy Miles, looked up at James with an unsettling familiarity. His wide eyes, the curve of his jaw, the way his lips twisted slightly in an expression that mirrored James's own when he was a boy, it was all too much to ignore. The resemblance was so sharp, so unmistakable, that James felt his breath catch in his throat. His heart slammed against his rib cage. The whispers started turning into viral footage within hours. Ex-wife shows up at billionaire's wedding with 5 children, claims he's the father. The air around James felt thick, suffocating. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared to face the life he thought he'd left behind, the woman he once loved, and the 5 children he never knew existed until now. As Emma walked towards the aisle, she didn't shout. She didn't cause a scene. She simply stood at the edge, her eyes locked with the ground, her gaze sweeping briefly over the crowd. Then in the silence, she whispered something to her children. "Let's go," she said, and just like that, she turned and walked away. The limousine door clicked shut with a sound louder than any explosion, and the crowd was left to digest the storm that had just hit. James was rooted to the spot, shaking. The champagne in his hand trembled, catching the light in a way that felt more like a fragile star than a drink. His world was crumbling right there in front of him, all of his carefully crafted success being torn apart by a single unexpected presence. Sophia, his glamorous bride-to-be, was stunned into silence. The bridesmaids huddled, and the wedding guests, once buzzing with excitement, now whispered in stunned disbelief. The media teams, who had been ready to capture the perfect moment for the headlines, scrambled. The paparazzi, who had followed James's every move for years now, had their new headline, one that wasn't part of the script. No one had expected this. Certainly not James. He watched Emma disappear into the limo, her 5 children climbing in beside her, disappearing from view. And with that, the wedding was no more. The lavish ceremony, the long-anticipated union, it all collapsed in that moment under the weight of a truth James had tried to bury. But the truth, it seemed, had a way of finding its own way out. James didn't chase after her. He didn't try to stop her. There was nothing he could do. Emma hadn't come here for revenge. She hadn't come to disrupt his wedding for any other reason than to make sure he faced the consequences of his past actions. She hadn't even needed to say a word. The silence that followed spoke louder than any words could have. The world watched as the viral video played, capturing the exact moment when the children entered. Each child, unique yet undeniably tied to James by blood, was a living testament to a life he had forgotten. The internet was abuzz. Who were these children? How had they ended up here? Why had Emma waited so long to reveal them? Rachel had been through hell alone. The loneliness of single motherhood, the exhaustion of caring for 5 newborns without any help, had been her reality for years. And yet she hadn't come here to claim anything from him. She had come to remind him that some truths, no matter how painful, will never stay hidden, not even for a man with the world at his feet. But the story didn't end here. No, this was only the beginning. I apologize for the interruption in the story, and I appreciate your understanding. What do you think will happen next? Will James try to repair the damage he has caused, or will his past remain an unhealable wound? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and send some love with a heart. James Turner's life, once so carefully controlled and meticulously crafted, had just unraveled in a matter of seconds. He stood motionless in the middle of the garden, his tuxedo suddenly feeling too tight, too suffocating. The sounds of murmurs and whispers from the wedding guests floated in the air like a haze. But all James could hear was the pounding of his own heart and the undeniable truth that had just crashed into his reality. He had once loved Emma Scott. He had once built a future with her, with the hopes of becoming something more, something greater together. But those dreams had shattered when he walked away from her, when he left her behind to chase success, leaving her alone, to navigate the difficult road of life. And now, 6 years later, she had appeared at his wedding with their 5 children. His children. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't ready for the weight of it. The moment he saw Miles, the little boy who looked so much like him, it felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he had built, came crashing down. He had known that walking away from Emma would have consequences, but he hadn't anticipated this. His mind raced, but his body remained still frozen in place. The champagne glass in his hand trembled. He could feel the eyes of every guest on him, some with curiosity, others with judgment. And then there was Sophia standing beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief. The woman he had promised to spend the rest of his life with, the woman he had planned to marry that very day, was now watching him in silence, her face pale as she processed what had just happened. James turned to her, his lips parting, as if he were about to say something, anything, to make this right, to explain. But the words failed him. What could he say? That he had no idea Emma would show up with his children, that he hadn't known they existed until today? The truth, raw and painful, sat like a stone in his stomach, and there was nothing he could do to change it. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Sophia, his voice hoarse, but it felt hollow, meaningless. He wasn't sorry for what had happened to him. He was sorry for the life he had abandoned, the life that now stood before him in the form of 5 small faces, 5 living reminders of his past mistakes. Sophia turned away from him, her hand clutching the bouquet in front of her, as she walked off, her footsteps heavy with disappointment. James's heart sank. She had been his future, his escape from everything that had held him back. But now, with one simple glance at Emma's children, he saw his true past laid bare before him. James didn't chase after Sophia. She was gone, just like Emma had been. But Emma hadn't left. She had stayed, had fought, had built something from nothing. And now she was here, showing up at his wedding, not to claim anything from him, but to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. The guests, once excited for the wedding, were now caught in a whirlwind of gossip. Phones were raised, cameras were clicking, and within moments the entire incident was plastered all over the internet. The headline read, "Ex-wife arrives at billionaire's wedding with 5 children, claims he's the father." James's mind spiraled as he tried to make sense of what was happening. How had it come to this? How had his carefully curated world been shattered in an instant? But before he could even process the enormity of it all, Emma was gone. She didn't stick around to cause a scene. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had said everything. With one final glance at him, one look that was not filled with rage but with something far more unsettling, something close to sadness, she turned and left. Her children followed her, stepping into the limousine that had brought them here, and the door closed softly behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. James stood there staring at the empty driveway where the limousine had once been. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run after them to tell Emma everything he had failed to say in the years they had been apart. But he didn't. He couldn't. The damage was already done. It wasn't just the wedding that had been ruined. It was everything. The life he had built with Sophia, the empire he had built with his company, the identity he had worked so hard to create, it all felt meaningless now. The truth had a way of making everything else fade into the background. The paparazzi were relentless, swarming the estate. The media team scrambled to contain the story, but it was already too late. The internet had already taken hold of it. Everyone had an opinion, and Emma was quickly becoming a symbol, a woman who had been wronged, a mother who had fought for her children, and had come back to make sure James knew exactly what he had lost. As for James, he was left alone in the aftermath of his own choices. There would be no wedding today. There would be no grand celebration. There would be nothing but the echo of his mistakes, the ghost of a woman he had once loved and abandoned, and 5 children who would never know him as the father they deserved. I apologize for the interruption in the story, and I hope you understand the emotional weight of what just happened. How do you think James should deal with the situation? Now, do you believe Emma will ever forgive him? Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and please don't forget to like the video and send some love with a heart. The days that followed the chaos of the wedding felt like a blur to James Turner. The frenzy of media attention, the endless calls from his lawyer, and the questions from every direction left him drained and hollow. He had spent years building a life of success, an empire that had given him everything he thought he ever wanted. But now, standing at the crossroads of his past and present, he felt a deep emptiness that success could never fill. James's heart ached as he thought about Emma Scott, the woman he had left behind, the woman who had once been his world. She had built a life without him, a life filled with 5 small lives, each one a reminder of a love he had walked away from. And though he had spent years pushing the pain of their past to the far corners of his mind, it had a way of returning when he least expected it, demanding his attention, his accountability. Days passed before James did something he hadn't done in years. He reached out to Emma. He had no expectations, no grand gestures to offer, just an apology that had been long overdue. The phone rang once, twice before Emma's voice answered. Her tone was cautious, guarded, but there was a softness there, an echo of the woman he had once known. "Emma, it's James," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say, but I need to start somewhere. I'm sorry for everything." For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then Emma spoke. "Why are you calling now, James?" Her voice was calm, but there was an undeniable bitterness beneath the surface. "After all this time, after all the hurt, you think an apology can fix everything? I don't think an apology can fix anything." James replied, the weight of his own words pressing down on him. "But I have to try. I have to try and make things right, at least for the kids. They deserve more than what I gave them. More than what I gave you." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence before Emma's response came. "I didn't do this to punish you, James," she said softly, her words cutting through the tension. "I did this because they deserve to know who you are. They deserve to know the man who chose to walk away, and they deserve to see if you can be someone better than the man who abandoned us. It's not about you anymore. It's about them." James swallowed hard, feeling the truth of her words pierce through him. He had walked away thinking he could leave the past behind, but now with every passing second, he realized just how deeply his actions had cut into the fabric of the lives he had once shared with Emma. "I don't expect anything from you, Emma," he said quietly, "but I want to be there for them. I want to be the father they deserve, and I'm willing to take it slow. I'll prove to you that I can be the man they need. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for a chance to show up. The line went silent again, and James feared that his words had fallen on deaf ears. But then Emma spoke, her voice softer, almost tentative. All right, she said, her breath shaky. But it's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy. You can't just walk in and expect them to trust you. I know, James said, his voice steady but full of regret. I'm not expecting anything. Just give me a chance. And so it began. James didn't rush back into their lives. He didn't try to force relationships that weren't ready to be built. Instead, he quietly showed up. He went to Miles's soccer games, not sitting on the sidelines like a proud father, but quietly observing from a distance, learning to see his children as they were, not as he imagined them to be. Weeks turned into months, and James continued his quiet journey toward redemption. He attended a park day where he was introduced to the kids not as their father, but as a man trying to make amends. He learned to smile, to laugh, to listen, and slowly Emma watched as he worked to prove that he wasn't the man who had left them all behind. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks. There were moments of doubt. But with every small victory, with every soft word from one of the children, James felt the walls inside him start to crumble. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He was showing up day after day, and that Emma realized was all she could ask for. One evening, after a long day of soccer and school projects, the kids were sitting on the couch, their laughter filling the room. James stood at the doorway, watching them, a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He had been given a chance to show up, to be a father, to be the man Emma had always believed he could be. And for the first time in a long time, he realized he wasn't just rebuilding his relationship with Emma. He was rebuilding himself. Emma, seeing him in that moment, knew that this wasn't just a story of failure and regret. It was a story of redemption, of showing up when it seemed impossible, of choosing to rise even when the weight of the past threatened to pull you down. And though their family wasn't perfect, far from it, Emma saw in her children's smiles and their quiet moments of trust that love could still bloom from the ashes of their broken past. What do you think of James's journey to redemption? Do you believe he can truly make up for the years he lost with his children? How do you think Emma feels about giving him this chance? If you enjoyed this story, comment no to 3 below. If you didn't quite like it, leave number 1 and number 2. If you thought it was okay, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and please don't forget to like the video, send some love with a heart, and share it with others.